The coffee in my hand was still hot, but I couldn't feel it anymore. 63 people filled the private dining room at Canoe, one of the most expensive restaurants in Toronto, their voices bouncing off the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the frozen Lake Ontario below. My father stood at the head of the long table, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, holding a manila folder like it was a trophy. He cleared his throat and announced that in honor of my brother Daniel's engagement, and to secure the family's future, he was transferring his shares of Hartwell Property Group to Daniel, effective immediately. My brother whooped. His fiancée, a woman named Brooke who always looked slightly bored unless money was being discussed, pressed both hands to her chest and made a sound like she had just witnessed a miracle. The table erupted. My aunt reached for her wine glass. My uncle clapped Daniel on the back. I didn't move. Hartwell Property Group, the company my grandmother started in 1987, with one duplex in Scarborough, and $30,000, she saved working double shifts at a nursing home. The company I had spent the last 6 years restructuring, refinancing, and quietly turning from a breaking-even operation into a portfolio worth $4.2 million. My father's name was still on the letterhead, but the work, every lease negotiated, every renovation budgeted, every tenant dispute mediated, every CRA filing reviewed, that was mine. He hadn't even looked at me when he said it. Before I tell you what happened next, and exactly how I watched the whole thing collapse without saying a single word out of turn, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know how far this story travels. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up. I have spent 6 years learning that the loudest person in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and I'm a CPA specializing in real estate taxation and corporate restructuring. My family calls me the one who's good with paperwork. The Canada Revenue Agency calls me something considerably more useful. I looked at Daniel across the table. He was already on his phone, probably texting friends. He had worked for the company for 11 months, officially. Before that, he had borrowed $40,000 from my father to start a meal prep business that lasted one summer. He had borrowed another $18,000 for a lease on a condo he couldn't afford. He was 27, charming, and completely unbothered by the concept of consequences. Brooke was 29, and she had not looked at Daniel once since my father made the announcement. She was looking at my father, calculating something I recognized immediately because I calculate things for a living. A woman marrying for love looks at her partner when good news lands. A woman marrying for leverage looks at the source. I picked up my coffee cup and took a slow sip. There was something my father did not know. There were actually several things my father did not know. But the most important one was this. 8 months ago, I had identified a significant problem with the company's structure. Hartwell Property Group had been operating as a sole proprietorship under my father's name for nearly 2 decades. When I came on board, I recommended converting it to a corporation for tax efficiency and liability protection. My father agreed. Signed what I put in front of him. He always signed what I put in front of him, which is how we got into this. And also how we were about to get out of it, and Hartwell Property Group Incorporated was registered with the Ontario Business Registry. My father held shares in that corporation, but the 2 commercial properties we had acquired in the last 3 years, the ones that represented 60% of the portfolio's current value, had been purchased through a numbered company I had established as a subsidiary, a holding structure I had recommended, documented, and explained to my father in a meeting he had half listened to while watching a Leafs game. He had nodded and signed. He did not own those properties. The subsidiary did, and the subsidiary's sole director, the person with signing authority, was me. What he was handing Daniel tonight was the shares of the parent company, a structure that, without the subsidiary assets, was worth considerably less than what everyone in this room believed. He was gifting his son a very elegant shell. He just didn't know that yet. I set my coffee cup down gently and let the celebration wash over me. My aunt was asking Brooke about the wedding venue. My uncle was telling a story nobody had asked for. My father was glowing with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had just done something noble. I smiled at no one in particular and waited. It took 22 minutes for my father to find me near the coat check at the end of the evening, his hand landing on my shoulder with the practiced warmth of a man who had never once considered that I might have feelings about what had just happened. "You understand, don't you?" he said. His voice was low and reasonable, the voice he used when he wanted something from me without asking for it directly. "Daniel needs this. He's starting a life. He needs something to stand on." I looked at him for a moment. "And what does he know about running the company?" I asked. My father waved his hand. "He'll learn. That's why you're there. You can guide him." So that was the plan. I would continue doing the work. Daniel would hold the title. Brooke would hold Daniel. My father would feel generous and wise, and I would receive exactly what I had always received from this family, which was the privilege of being useful. "You have your career," he said, as though my career was a hobby I had developed to fill time. "You have your designation. You make good money. Claire, you don't need the company the way he does. This was the part that took my breath away, not with anger, but with the sheer structural familiarity of it. He wasn't being cruel. He genuinely believed this. In his mind, my competence had disqualified me from needing support. My success was proof I didn't require anything. Daniel's repeated failures were proof that he did. The math he was running was, she can handle herself, so she will. You're right, I said. I'll be fine. He exhaled. His shoulders dropped. He put his arm around me briefly, the hug of a man who believes the hard part is over. That's my girl, he said. I got my coat. I walked to the elevator. I rode down 17 floors in complete silence and stood on Bay Street in the January cold for a long moment, watching the light change on the CN Tower across the water. Then I took out my phone and sent one email. The next 6 weeks were very quiet. I continued going to work. I continued managing the properties. I answered Daniel's questions, which were mostly about whether he could change the company logo and whether we could expense his suits. I processed Brooke's increasingly specific requests for information about the asset values, the revenue streams, which properties were owned outright versus mortgaged. She was thorough. I gave her exactly what I was legally required to give her, and not one number more. I also spent those 6 weeks completing something I had started 8 months earlier, which was a formal valuation of the subsidiary structure and a legal opinion letter from a commercial real estate lawyer in Mississauga confirming the ownership boundaries. I had the documents notarized. I filed the updated corporate records with the Ontario Registry. Everything was in order. Everything had been in order for months. The thing about being the person who does the paperwork is that nobody watches you do it. The engagement party was held in late February, at a venue in Yorkville that cost more per hour than most people's monthly rent. My father paid for it, which meant in some indirect sense I had paid for it, which is a thought I allowed myself only briefly before setting it aside. 200 people, an open bar, a photo booth. Brooke had hired a coordinator. Everything was very beige and very expensive. I wore a dark green dress and arrived exactly on time. Daniel found me at the drinks table within 10 minutes. He was flushed with something, excitement or champagne or both, and he pulled me aside with the energy of someone who had been waiting to deliver news. Brooke's been talking to a real estate lawyer, he said. He was trying to sound casual and not quite managing it, just to understand the structure, now that I'm coming on properly. Get everything set up correctly. That's smart, I said. Yeah. He paused. She had some questions about the numbered company, the subsidiary. I'm sure she did. She said he stopped, restarted. She said the 2 commercial properties aren't actually in the parent company. She said they're held separately. That's correct, I said. He looked at me. Dad doesn't know that. He signed the incorporation documents, I said, and the purchase agreements, and the annual corporate summaries. I went through all of it with him. Claire. His voice had gone flat. Come on. I'm not sure what you're asking me, I said pleasantly. He rubbed the back of his neck. Brooke thinks there might be a problem with the transfer. She thinks maybe Dad didn't actually have the authority to transfer what he thought he was transferring. That sounds like a question for a lawyer, I said. We have a lawyer. Then you should talk to her. He stared at me for a long moment. I watched him run through the options and find none of them particularly comfortable. He wanted me to tell him it was all fine, that there was a simple explanation, that Brooke's lawyer had misread something. I watched him understand, slowly, that I was not going to say that. Did you do this on purpose? He asked. I looked at my brother. I thought about the $40,000 he borrowed for the meal prep company. I thought about the 9 months I spent rebuilding the company's cash flow after my father made a handshake deal on a property in Hamilton that lost us $60,000. I thought about every Christmas where my father bragged about Daniel's potential and asked me to explain my job to relatives who smiled politely and changed the subject. I thought about sitting in that restaurant watching my father hand over the thing I had spent 6 years building to someone who couldn't have told you our vacancy rate if his life depended on it. I structured the company to protect our assets, I said. That's literally my job. He walked away. I got a fresh glass of wine. The actual confrontation came 40 minutes later, in the coatroom off the main hallway, which was slightly less dramatic than a hotel ballroom but still adequately witnessed by 3 people who had come to retrieve scarves and chosen to stay. My father came in with Brooke's lawyer, a compact woman named Sonia who clearly would have preferred to have this conversation in an office on a Tuesday. My father's face was the color of old brick. He was holding a document, Brooke's lawyer's summary, which he thrust toward me like evidence. What is this? He said. It looks like a corporate structure analysis, I said. Claire. His voice cracked on my name. The commercial properties. Sonia says they're not in the company I transferred. They're in a wholly owned subsidiary, I said, which I set up 14 months ago with your knowledge and written consent. I didn't understand what I was signing. I walked you through it, I said. You asked me if it would save money on taxes. I said yes. You said fine. Sonia, to her credit, was staying very quiet and taking notes. You knew I didn't understand the full picture, my father said. You let me stand up in that restaurant and make an announcement without telling me. I'm sorry, I said. Were you planning to consult me before you announced that you were giving away the company I run? The room went very still. That's not. He stopped. Tried again. I built that company. It was mine to give. You built a duplex in Scarborough, I said. I turned it into a $4 million portfolio. And I have 6 years of financial statements, tax filings, board resolutions, and legal agreements that document exactly how that happened and exactly who did the work. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm clarifying what you actually own. So what does Daniel have? His voice had lost its authority. He sounded, for the first time I could remember, genuinely uncertain. Daniel has the shares of Hartwell Property Group Incorporated, I said, which holds the original residential properties, the operating accounts, and the brand. That's not nothing. And the commercial properties? Those are held by a numbered company of which I am the sole director, I said. Those did not transfer. Brooke appeared in the doorway. She had clearly been listening. Her expression was not the one of a woman who was surprised. It was the expression of a woman who had been proven right about something and was deciding how to feel about it. There has to be a way to fix this, my father said. He was looking at me the way he had looked at Daniel's failed business, like this was a problem I was supposed to absorb and resolve. We're family. We can figure this out. I'm not sure what you want me to fix, I said. The structure is legally sound. I can provide you with the full documentation if Sonia wants to review it. Sonia said that would be helpful and handed me a card. Claire, my father's voice dropped. Don't do this. And there it was, the same line, repackaged. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass us. Be the good daughter. Absorb this quietly and go back to being useful. I thought about what it would feel like to say fine, to restructure the subsidiary, to sign something that handed Brooke and Daniel the commercial properties that I had sourced, financed, and managed, to watch them take it and spend it down within 2 years, while my father nodded approvingly at family dinners. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I haven't done anything, I said. I set up a legal corporate structure, filed all the required documents, and disclosed them to you in writing. If you'd like to discuss a formal buyout of my interest in the subsidiary, I'm happy to have that conversation with lawyers present on both sides. That's the appropriate process. My father looked at me like he didn't recognize me. That was the moment I realized he had never actually seen me. He had seen the useful daughter, the one who handled the paperwork, the one who could be counted on to smooth things over. He had never seen the person who had spent 6 years making deliberate, careful, legally documented decisions because she had understood, from the moment she took this job, that the day might come when she would need every signature to hold up. He hadn't stolen from me, exactly. He had tried to. He had just not understood who he was dealing with. I'm going to get some air, I said. I walked out through the main room. Daniel was standing near the bar and he watched me pass without speaking. Brooke watched me too. I nodded at her because she had, in the end, done me a favor by pushing this into the open tonight, instead of 3 months from now when the transfer had been further processed and things were messier. Outside it was cold in the specific way February in Toronto is cold, the wind off the lake cutting through everything. I stood on the pavement and watched a cab move slowly up Bloor Street. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. We need to talk. Call me. I put the phone in my purse. The next morning I contacted my lawyer and we began the formal process of documenting the subsidiary structure for any future negotiations. I sent my father a letter, professional, precise, containing nothing emotional and everything relevant, outlining the corporate history, the documented disclosures, and the appropriate legal avenues available to him if he wished to discuss an acquisition of my interest. He didn't respond for 2 weeks. When he did, his email was 4 lines and referred me to a lawyer he had retained, which was the right answer, honestly. It meant he was finally taking the situation seriously. The negotiations took 3 months. In the end, I retained full control of the subsidiary and the commercial properties. My father retained the residential portfolio and the operating company. Daniel and Brooke received what the transfer had actually included, which was a legitimate business with a solid foundation and absolutely no obligation from me to keep running it for them. I heard from my aunt that Brooke's enthusiasm for the wedding had cooled somewhat after the full picture became clear. I didn't follow up on that. I found a new office, a small one, and I set up my own practice. Corporate restructuring, real estate taxation, the kind of work that is quiet and precise and entirely mine. I still drove past the Scarborough duplex sometimes. The first one, the one my grandmother bought with her nursing home savings. I thought about her a lot those months. She had built something from nothing in a city that wasn't always easy, and she had understood that paperwork was not just paperwork. It was a record. It was evidence. It was protection. I had learned that from her without ever being told directly. I had simply watched and understood. My father and I spoke eventually. It was not warm, but it was honest, which was more than we had ever managed before. He said he hadn't realized how much I had contributed. I told him I knew that. He said he should have consulted me. I agreed. We didn't hug. We didn't pretend the restaurant dinner had been a small thing. But we talked. Whether that becomes something or stays exactly what it is, I don't know yet. What I know is this. I left that engagement party in Yorkville, and I drove home on the Gardner, and I felt, for the first time in years, that I was not waiting for something to be taken from me, because I had spent 6 years making sure it couldn't be. The documents were always in order. They just hadn't known to check,